Hi, Leah.
Thanks for everyone for joining. Sorry, a little technical difficulty there. So this panel, you all are here as experts to talk about the growing problem in the public sector that we've seen, ransomware, and help educate a little further as well. So before we get started, we can do a round of introductions with all of you. Ritesh, we'll start with you.
Hi, guys. Nice to be here. My name is Ritesh Agrawal. I'm the CEO, founder of Airgap Networks, and we offer the best defense against ransomware.
Michael?
Good afternoon, Michael South. I lead the AWS Public Sector Security and Compliance business for the Americas. And prior to AWS, I was 25 years in the U.S. Navy and the Deputy CISO for the City of Washington, D.C. for quite about a time in public sector.
Stan?
Yep. Hi, everybody. Stan Golubchik, CEO and founder of ContraForce. We are an XDR security as a service company working in the cloud to help secure our customers and end users.
Dan?
Yeah, Dan Ward here, CTO of Sapio. We're, attack surface detection, threat reduction type organization. And, I've been in the security space for 25 years as a practitioner and on the vendor side before starting the Sapio company.
And Chase?
Hi, Chase Cunningham, also retired Navy. I'm a retired chief, and currently I'm a principal analyst and vice president at Forrester Research.
Great. Well, it's great to sync with all of you again. I know I've worked with you or known you in some capacity over the last few years and have become friends with you all. So I'm so glad you all are here. And before we jump in, on this topic of ransomware, and yes, we do see it in the news every day. Today, Enel Group is in the energy sector. They just got hit for the second time this year, $14 million. Sky Lakes Medical Center in Oregon got hit, and I know there's others today that happened as well. So it's real and it's a problem, but it is also in the news every day, and to some degree, it can be hyped up. So can you all break it down simply? What are the most common attack vectors that we see in public sector? And whoever wants to start.
Well, let me first start saying it's not hyped up. As a matter of fact, I think it's the opposite. We are not hearing as much as we should be because many of the organizations are probably not disclosing that they have been impacted with ransomware. So this is a much, much bigger problem. I've had many conversations with customers, both in the public sector and private sector, and I see this problem is equally painful and growing as we go forward. In terms of the attack vectors, of course, I'd love to hear the other experts' opinions as well, but my view is that there is all kinds of issues inside the organization. Just to summarize, is the old architecture that is not been modified for the last number of decades. I think there needs to be a fresh perspective in terms of how you deploy your infrastructure, how you deploy your devices, how you look at your infrastructure. And obviously, we are advocates of zero trust principles. That would be the right approach going forward, but I'm sure others have their views and thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I think what is hyped up a little bit in the media is that this overemphasis that it's a zero-day attack, that it's nation states, and it's these very advanced threat actors that are breaking through secure platforms. And that's not really what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that it's known vulnerabilities that have been out, that patches have been out for a while, and those servers aren't patched. There are compromised credentials. There are open trust models so that when a phishing email comes in and is able to exploit a particular vulnerability, it's able to laterally move within the environment quite freely because it's an open trust model. So I think that's what's overhyped is that it's not those advanced threats. It's your basic cyber hygiene that is not being performed that's allowing these attacks to take root.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael, that's the number one problem that we see is just lack of preparedness, right? So we know that the number one attack vector is email. We know that the number one propagation method is well-known vulnerabilities and lack of segmentation, right? And because those things are not being addressed, those make an organization highly vulnerable to a ransomware attack. So it's obviously working for the attackers. They're making money. I mean, they've got a positive reinforcement model. And until we find ways to start breaking that, which is really focusing on fundamental cyber hygiene to, reduce the amount of attack surface, reduce the number of malicious emails that make it through, the end user training, all the basics of locking down an environment and making it more difficult for an attacker to achieve their objectives. That's, those are the things that are going to help save the day here, right?
Yeah, Dan, I'll agree with that. And just to add to that as well, I think the component around security hygiene and best practice is pretty critical. A lot of these attacks, obviously we have a new evolved attack surface because everything has really become further digitalized as we see today. But many times it really becomes predicated around just best practices and hygiene around education and security awareness training. So if it's a phishing email, understanding where that's actually being sent from, not clicking URLs that you don't know if they're going to be malicious or not. So just a little bit more of a concerted effort of educating the end user and understanding, their duty and responsibility to keep that organization and their environment secure, I think is definitely critical.
Chase, any comments from you?
I mean, I think that Stan's point, like I agree with it in concept, right? But I just have experience wise being a red teamer and doing exercises and whatever else. Like I work with organizations all the time that will say, well, we just trained our group. And I'm like, well, if I brought in a bunch of heavy hitting red teamer guys today, do you think no one would click on an email I put in front of them? So it's, from my perspective, I agree more with the microsegmentation, technical controls, pushing it out where the users can't do things that they shouldn't, and basically eliminating that threat. And I think too that we have a real misconception in the space where we expect folks to operate like security personnel, and that's not their job. If you work in HR, it's kind of dumb for me to be like, you should understand how to not, do things and do cyber stuff and whatever else, when in reality, they should just, learn how to do their job and be put in a secure enclave where they don't have the option of infecting the enterprise. I mean, I don't know how to, rip apart a Viper engine, but I can get in a Viper and drive it. So I think that that's one of the differences. And I think the technology in the space has finally evolved to a place where you can do that. Now, again, like love Stan, I agree with him 1,000%. We need to make sure that people understand the threat space. However, I think that our sort of reliance that we've had in this thing around, educate, train, make the users better, and thinking that that's going to keep us safer is proven that it's not, not going to do that. And then on top of that, the antivirus industry writ large, wholehearted, has categorically failed to defend us from ransomware. So, folks that continue to say, well, I have antivirus, ransomware won't get me. Like, no, you're going to get owned. Like, if ransomware does things like infects the machine by using PowerShell, which is a function inside of the operating system, to send out to G-Cloud. Like, this is leveraging the system itself. I mean, this is almost like cancer inside of digital space. It's not necessarily malicious and super cool and going to be identified by some, Machiavellian thingy, but it's going to be doing weird stuff, and it's going to be aberrant behavior. So I think that, Ritesh and some of the folks on the call, like the approach in this space, in my opinion, technology has evolved to limit this effect, but it's, a lot of times, like Mike and everybody we rely on the wrong things. I fundamentally, categorically don't believe that I can fix people, but I can dang sure fix infrastructure.
Yeah, a lot of great points there, and a few things I actually want to come back to in a little bit throughout the conversation that you hit on that I think are going to be important to address too. But taking a look at then the public sector, and I mean, yes, they've been hit hard, but so is every other organization or vertical, if you think about it, especially with COVID and the pandemic. But why is it that public sector gets hit so hard, and what are some of those top reasons that they are a target?
They're the slow gazelle. I mean, they're public funded. They get money from the government, and they have limited resources to try and implement this massive thing inside of infrastructure that is increasingly disparate. And from the bad guys' perspective, I don't look for hard targets because that's a lot of work, and I don't have time for that stuff. I look for the limping, wounded antelope as it stumbles across the cyber Serengeti, and then I attack that. And unfortunately, schools, public sector, those domains don't have the funds and investment and the resources to defend this side if they approach it in the wrong method.
And I can validate that. When I was in the city of DC, I think a lot of people have heard about the police department CCTV cameras were hacked and had ransomware on it 2 days before the last presidential inauguration. And throughout the investigation, and this was all public, but it happened, they had no idea who they were hitting. It was an easy target and they hit it. And it just so happened to be, the city of Washington, DC, 2 weeks before the inauguration. That was just pure luck. And because of the fact that, they were open and vulnerable.
And, just quickly story, like I found a vulnerability on a system in the state of Texas and I notified those folks about the vulnerability. They sent me a cease and desist letter. They told me, stop telling us we have a vulnerable system. And what happened? 2 years later, that system got destroyed with ransomware. So like, it's literally a position of, I would rather you not tell me because now I'm liable than actually fix the problem because that will cost me time and resources. And that, like when I got that cease and desist letter, it's in a box. I wish I'd have framed it.
Yeah, the other aspect of that is that the educational systems are highly valuable targets, right? So not only are they easy, if you can get the personal identifying information for somebody under the age of 18, you typically have a longer window to operate with that identity before you get discovered. So attackers know that those are more valuable, and schools are a great collection of that data, unfortunately. So they make a great target, rich data that is highly valuable and easy to get. So I think that's why we see a lot, especially in the educational facilities, we see a lot of targeting there.
And in general, I've also noticed that in the public sector, as a vendor, I can say the selling channels are not as straightforward often enough like they are in the private sector, for example. So you have to jump certain hoops, you have to have certain compliances, you have to hit the right budget cycle at the right time. So all of these kind of slow down the sort of pace of innovation in the public sector. So that makes them an easier target too.
Yeah, and I think to Dan's point as well too, when it comes to PII, you can look at the other side of the coin with PHI and the healthcare vertical as well. So any of those areas where, the actual attackers understand that it's not just around extrapolating and aggregating that sensitive data that we can go and monetize on, but it's also being able to go towards an actual facility that if we impact them with ransomware, it's going to stop effective triage, right? It's going to stop effective medication and effectively potentially harm or affect those individuals in the hospital looking for acute or chronic care. So I think it's been more prevalent, especially as a lot of these hospitals are becoming more interconnected from digital records as well. So there's a lot on stake now more than ever.
And finally,
Go ahead.
Finally, I would like to say that they are also hit with Freedom of Information Act. So they have to publish it. Just keep in mind, we are obviously thinking public sector is getting hit harder. I think it's everybody getting hit harder, except the FIOS applied to them doesn't apply to the private sector.
And I was just going to add that we talked a lot about, where the government is in general, but for those attackers that are purposely seeking out the government, right, they know they have money, depending on the government organization. You have the hacktivism approach, right? And we're seeing a lot of efforts right now to, cause discord across the U.S. government and the public view and perception of the government and the government's integrity in a lot of different areas, especially around elections right now. So there's a lot of opportunities for attackers to really cause a lot of damage in a lot of areas and still make money off of it.
So to that point, because I think it's now, according to the Department of Treasury, will it be illegal to pay the ransom? And then what are your suggestions to the agency?
I think personally this is one of the all-time dumbest things that legislative bodies have ever come up with in the history of dumb things that legislative bodies have ever come up with. Because we're in a position where we have companies that are going under, where they can't pay their bills, where they are bricked. Maersk and Norsk Hydro were literally shut down globally, logistics for 6 weeks. And now the government, the legislative bodies are going to say, if you pay when you get owned, we're going to basically shut you down and fine you again. Like, this is, not only are you punishing someone for getting run over, you're basically running them back over again to make sure that they're dead. And this this is something that just shouldn't be employed, shouldn't be allowed. I think I introduced legislation to Capitol Hill last year called the Negligence in Cyber Act. And that was different, where we were talking about if you do things that are knowingly negligent, that puts you in a position where you are compromised, then certain leaders get punished, but not the business itself. Because the difference being, if you're the CISO for a major organization and you're taking home that nice paycheck, and you know that you do things like send people cease and desist letters when they tell you of vulnerabilities and you get owned, then you should be punished. If we built aircraft that fell out of the sky when the head engineer said, well, it doesn't need wings, we wouldn't go back and rip the company apart for it. That person would go to jail.
Well, plus not to mention if they, you have some school of thought that says, okay, I need to be protected, so, or I'm secure, so it won't happen. Well, no, it's going to happen, right? Once, if you're lucky, but in the case of Anil Group, that in the energy sector, twice it happened. So $14 million this time, but that's a lot of money.
There are clearly defined, usually it's kind of hard to define what negligence looks like, because you're kind of like, well, was that knowingly bad? Did you continue to, avoid best practices? However, in cyber, we have what are called logs. We know that what you've done ignored best practices. We have standards, we have compliance. I can prove in a court of law that you've been negligent. So, that type of thing makes a lot more sense than saying, if you pay the ransom, we will crush your company because you paid the ransom.
I can definitely understand the intent behind the law, right? Because a lot of that money goes back to other illegal activities. It continues to develop the market, so people continue to use ransomware. And then when you do it, it also sets you up as a second target, right? They know you paid once, you're probably going to pay again, right? And so I definitely understand the intent behind the law. But when you have a small business, and we've seen some when they get hit, if they don't pay, they basically are completely, their business is done. They're over. Their livelihood is gone, right? And at the end of the day, I think this is, a judgment call for each organization to determine, what can they afford, what the risk they can accept, and then, make that call for themselves. Because at the end of the day, if you don't pay, but you're completely out of business and you have to go find a new livelihood, that there's an opportunity loss there, I guess you'd say as well.
And I also think one is always ready to pay a ransom to save their own kids. So this Department of Treasury guys, they probably have not been hit, so they'll probably realize. But more importantly, I think the consequences of not paying is also very high. Just so that everybody knows, is these hackers are getting very smart. They're stealing the data and threatening to publish into the public internet. And it may not just be the business data. It may be my data. It may be your data. And so for Treasury to say that don't pay and let the data be published, that kind of affects all of us. Because let's face it, all of our data is out there in some domain, and that is probably getting threatened to be published at this moment. So I agree with Chase. This is not a good idea. Let people make the right decision and make sure that they're doing the right thing for security, and punish if they're not. But blanket statement of don't pay is probably too big.
It just doesn't work. That's not good.
Well, and I think this is also, we're not taking a root cause analysis approach here, because in the day, any threat actor, any group who's really focused on being able to either gain monetary or just data from their actions, they're going to find that least path of resistance to what everyone is saying earlier. So if we're going out there and penalizing these end users, these companies, organizations, by paying something when they're in a crutch where they don't have business continuity, rather than trying to be able to implement best practices around security frameworks, regulatory frameworks, making sure they have the proper technology, process, and people, and just saying, here, we're going to actually fine you if you need to get out of this tight spot, that's not addressing the problem, right? So, I mean, to Chase's point, though, putting aside the conscious negligence that some of these companies obviously are turning a blind eye to some of these activities. That said, if, from a legislation perspective, if we're not putting the overlay where we're addressing the root of the problem rather than just the symptom, we're not going to really make much progress here.
Yeah, there's 2 points I want to make here too. I've seen that, that negligence in action, where we go in and show with our technology people things that they didn't know about themselves. And they actually get angry with us because now they have an ethical obligation. Once you know something, you can never unknow it, right? So they get upset with us because we show them things that they would really just rather not see.
Yeah, those are fun conversations, aren't they?
Oh, they are. It's it's a very quick sales process. I'll tell you, the answer is no, and you're done. But
Right.
it's interesting from another perspective. The ransomware actors, typically they're coming from areas where we already have a Department of State ITAR in place, and it's illegal to transfer money there already. What these attackers are doing is trying to find illegitimate means to an economy that they don't have legitimate access to. So it's not like we needed a new law there to say, hey, if you pay this ransom, you're breaking the law. Well, they already were. I mean, it just kind of puts a period on that. And I think the best we can hope for from that is that people will pay attention, right? If there is personal accountability on leadership's part, this is one thing that Sarbanes-Oxley taught us, that if leaders are personally held accountable for negligence, in that case in financial reporting, then we start to see behavior change inside the organization. So if this gives us an opportunity to change behavior, I look at it as a positive thing. The jury's still out as to whether that's going to be the outcome of this or not, or if, like Chase said, it's just beating a dead horse.
Yeah, I mean, part of that too is, the ability for someone to be in a leadership position and have things go wrong when they knew that it was going to go wrong, and then they bounce with a golden parachute. Like, if you want to pay me $6 million to screw up a job, send me the check. Like, I'm glad to take that hit right now. I just don't see how some of these organizations can stand there and, willingly say, like, well, we tried, we gave it our dangest. Like, no, you had admin open to the internet for 13 months, like, and someone told you about it. You're negligent. So your thing of like, well, whoopsie, that's not going to fly. You need to go, bust rocks for a few years, and maybe that'll change things.
To Stan's point, when he talked about really improving, our protections and actually raising the bar a little bit, especially when you look at, state and local governments that, typically in certain areas don't always have the same amount of capital working funds that, federal government has. The Cyber Solarium Commission actually made a recommendation for legislation to provide and fund improvements for cybersecurity across the state and local government, across the U.S. And I think things like that, if we could see that actually go into effect, could definitely help especially the smaller states and cities, local governments.
And real quickly, there's one more thing in this ransomware place. Like, the people are looking for the magic, silver bullet in this. And Ritesh can align to it. But if you see the same user account showing up in 300,000 machines in 18 hours, you probably have a spread problem. It's not that your, machine learning engine didn't identify the malware. It's that you have excessive privileges and shares and connectivity and bad passwords and whatever else. So act. Don't just sit there going like, I really hope that this wildfire burns itself out.
It's not a rocket science, seriously, to protect. To plug in 95% or 99% of your holes is really, really super easy. You just need to be willing to make a change, essentially, do something about it. The biggest enemy is do nothing, or just keep doing what you've been doing for the last 20 years, then you'll have the same results that you've had for the last 20 years.
Ritesh, I want to hit on that for a little bit, because in terms of how, best practices, or how can public sector prepare better, or things that they can do. But before going into that, looking at, over the last few years or even further back, in terms of how attack behaviors and threats and hackers have changed or evolved, which they have, right? So one example I heard the other day from one of our board members, that they years ago were at DEF CON in Las Vegas, and were going around with a news crew into a financial service, a bank, and brought them in, and the bank agreed, yes, you can call out the vulnerabilities I have and where I'm at risk, and it'll be captured on, news segment. Well, fast forward to today, I don't think that happens anymore, because of the privacy and everything that people want now, where even an assessment that you call something out is considered, did you breach a privacy of mine? So going into that, can you guys talk about how have things evolved in the behaviors and the attack threat vectors, and what does that look like? Starting there, and then going into, then what can people do in organizations, public sector, to prepare or watch out for? So 2 questions.
Well, look, the enterprise infrastructure has completely changed. Our behaviors have changed, like you mentioned. pretty much all of the applications have moved to some sort of a cloud, whether public or private or SaaS, one of the areas. Pretty much the devices have become very much IoT centric or think centric. There is 1:10 ratio per user to number of devices now. Everything is connected. The communication pattern has fundamentally changed as well. There used to be a lot of lateral communication, and that demanded that you have all kinds of lateral availability in terms of access and control. Pretty much all of the communication is now vertical, meaning going to the cloud, going to the applications, essentially. And I think the industry has not kept up with the changes that are happening at a fundamental level. People are working from home more so than ever before, and all of these have impacts to your security posture. And if you continue to deploy the same gear that you deployed 10 years ago and expect to have the security, then you have a problem. And also, because you're stretching the use cases around now, people have made a mistake of allowing access in the same fashion. So you're connecting through VPN into your corporate. Now you have full access from your home network, which is predominantly not so secure, into your corporate network. And from the corporate network, you're going to go to the cloud to access the application or the assets that you have. So you're creating all kinds of complications inside your environment. And of course, then mistakes happen and hackers actually exploit that. So there is an easy way to fix it. And the good news is we have inspiration in our pockets. I think we don't give enough credit to telcos and mobile providers when it comes to innovation. But you've never heard about entire subscriber base of a particular carrier, let's just say Sprint or Vodafone or Deutsche Telekom got ever impacted with ransomware. But you hear about this organizations or enterprises all day long. And if you double click on it from a technology point of view, you'd understand what is the difference between the two. And I think we have that inspiration and we should leverage that.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is Ritesh talked about a lot of the move to the cloud, is that the cloud starts to offer opportunities that have been very difficult to achieve in an on-prem environment. When you're able to architect for that high availability across multiple data centers, and you get to the point where it's easy to say you need to patch your systems, right? But we all understand that when you're actually looking at live production environments, especially in large monolithic applications on a single server stack and in a single data center, that it can be very problematic to try to patch that production server because you may have to take it down for a period of time. And in some businesses, as soon as that application goes down, it might mean you're losing millions of dollars a minute, right, that it's down. And so as you start moving to the cloud, you're able to start patching your images and you decouple your applications. You no longer have these monolithic applications. You have a lot of small servers, microsegmentation across multiple data centers. And what you do is you start moving from where you treat servers like pets. So we talk about this all the time. I grew up doing sysadmin 20-something years ago, and we treated servers like pets. You feed them, you pet them, you pray to the server gods. If a server died, you cried. It was a bad day. Now, today, we don't have to treat servers like pets, right? We could treat them like a commodity. If one server fails, it doesn't matter because the load is automatically failed over to other servers that are up and running. You're able to replace the failed server within a couple of minutes, reload balance, and it's all across multiple data centers or within regions within the cloud. So you get the self-healing architecture, but you have the ability to now patch your images and do a nice, safe not a failover, but a rebalancing when you bring those patch servers up and get rid of the ones that were unpatched. So you have the ability to start improving your patch process. And then with segmentation, isolation of your applications, move into that zero trust model for your identity and access management, and a lot of other areas. And then finally, when you do move to the cloud, you're actually allowing us to take care of your infrastructure. So it allows your folks to focus more specifically on your mission and business and those specific security controls around that. So you get rid of that undifferentiated heavy lifting that frees you up to really focus on what's most important for your business. I think those are the things that really are helping that are available now today.
It's interesting because the technology has changed tremendously in the past decade. What hasn't changed is kind of the leadership's approach to, even awareness of security. That sounds like it's difficult and that's expensive. I don't really want to have to deal with that. And I think that gets reinforced by, people in their organization that they pay to make them secure, telling them, yep, we're good, whether they actually are or not. So that even if they want to make a good decision from a technology perspective, they're being told that they're fine because that's somebody's job to make them fine, right? And sometimes just like disrupting that communication change and getting an external perspective of, hey, we're being told we're fine. Are we? There needs to be a check and balance on that, and I see very, very often that the leadership of the organization will go back to the same people who put them in that position to say, hey, I want you to vet these external providers to make sure that they align with the messaging that you're giving me. When what they should be saying is, I want a completely different perspective that is independent of what I'm being told from my internal channel to validate that that I'm receiving accurate information and that I truly understand the risk associated with the business that I'm managing.
We see that a lot with our customers for AWS. There's a misperception of what the cloud really is. Some people have a tendency to think it's just a renaming of the old colo facility type arrangement, and still trying to apply that legacy mindset as they start moving to the cloud. So there's an education piece with this too, right? As you start moving through modern architectures, decoupling, microsegmentation, moving to the cloud. It is a paradigm shift in a lot of different areas, and it does require retraining, education, and awareness of that to be able to understand the capabilities and start looking at how to take advantages of those, rather than, like you said, just kind of looking at the same vendors or the same way of doing things.
Yeah, I think there's also been a strong shift in a way now that more than ever we've democratized infrastructure, compute, application development. So obviously we've had a lot of disparate components of organizations when they go out and figure out how do we drive business optimization, security, GRC, customer impact. But at that overall disposal, or at that result, what ends up happening is that a lot of times these internal teams aren't communicating effectively. So you get a lot of shadow IT, you get a lot of disparate applications and resources that are spin up. So with that power of the compute infrastructure that we have today, which we can harness, comes much more risk. But that's where that shared responsibility needs to step in. And the customer needs to be well aware and educated on being able to understand what resources are being instantiated, what are the policies or the misconfigurations that are happening. And I think that's really one of the main underpinning issues we have today is about visibility. So without proper visibility into your entire heterogeneous environment, you lack a lot of the capabilities to ensure that your security posture is where it needs to be.
Well, I would actually counter that it's not an increase in risk. A lot of it's the same risk. It's just that you now have a different environment, right? So the risk of misconfiguring your firewall and opening up your internal network to the public has always been there. But we've been managing firewalls for decades, right? We've kind of learned how to lock down the perimeter. We've learned how to really secure those technology platforms that we've been using for decades. So, when you start looking at risk, it's just a change in risk and a change in the technology platform that you're using. And if you're unfamiliar with it, then yes, you're going to make mistakes with it, which is why I kind of go back to the training being important. But just to counter, just a change in risk and change in the technology platform that you're using to address it, not an increase of risk.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's an increase of risk. What I would say it is a simplification of risk appetite, because customers don't know what they're spinning up today and how to manage it, because now you can go stand up an appliance and you can rack and stack it in the past. But nowadays, by just clicking through a few buttons and instantiating an entire network topology has become more simple than ever. So I agree with you absolutely. They need to be aware and being able to embed the controls and policies early on when they go set up those environments.
I also think that the notion of sort of incident response is not properly taken care of when it comes to ransomware. That has the potential to spread pretty rapidly. And based on my conversation so far with as many CIOs as I have, I hear responses like, we'll start investigating and isolating infected devices or infected endpoints. And my response always is, do you really know how long it'll take, and do you have the process to identify those devices? You need to have a way to instantly lock down the network and ensure that you don't have more propagation inside the network. And honestly, nobody's prepared to have that. Something like a ransomware kill switch would be a must-have for an environment like this, much like we have at a gas station, the emergency shut-off wall. I think enterprises are missing, or organizations are missing that.
So a few things come up around training, awareness, I think people, but so kind of taking a step back a little bit and looking at, the practices between federal, civilian, DoD, state and local government. What type of practices should be implemented and or considered? And is it different when you think about civilian, public sector, federal government, et cetera? Is there a difference at all, or you can elaborate there?
I think the practices are the same. It's the same network, same topology, same endpoints essentially, whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux essentially, or some flavor of these things. So I don't think it's different in terms of what the best practices should be. However, I think the agility and being able to respond very quickly is different when what I've seen between the public sector and the private sector. So that's one observation I have.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think we're still based off of the same protocols and network topology and policies that we maintain today, either in public or private. Really, the only thing that we need to be sensitive and aware of is just when we look at verticals and attestation of compliance around some of those based on where that critical sensitive data is actually residing. But beyond that, I think best practices from one framework, let's say NIST, for example, will overlay to either one public or private sector. And there's even great areas where there's a ton of documentation on how do you take NIST, for example, and provide that crosswalk working with a cloud service provider and being able to map those controls and policies accordingly. So I don't think there needs to be a delineation between the two. There is a baseline, and I think that organizations from both sides of the coin need to be able to adhere to that.
Yeah, my thought would be, reduction, which is commonplace, a common problem, right? So where we tend to see the problems are in the systems that people have forgotten about, whether it be corporate or in a state or local level. They spin something up, they attach it to the internet, they forget about it, they attach it to their network, they forget about it. And that's really the attacker's playground, is not the stuff that you're highly focused on in your cloud environment or the areas where you're investing in. It's the things that are legacy that you've forgotten about that tend to be not maintained as well, that create opportunity for attackers. And again, they're not receiving the attention from the security team or from the business in terms of investment. So, those are the things that I like to look at is what are the things that we can remove? What are the things that we can do to reduce the amount of infrastructure that you have to manage to start with? And then, okay, now that we've reduced the overall, risk surface, how do we reduce the level of risk in what's left, right? And that's a common thing that people overlook. It's like how to secure your cloud environment. Well, if you don't even need that cloud environment to begin with, can we just turn it off? And then we don't have to worry about how to secure it. And then, hey, we've got 10 other ones over here we really should be focused on, but at least we don't have 11, right? And that's the piece that's overlooked so often is, do we even need the stuff that we have? And if not, let's get rid of it. And then, and that's universally applicable. And that's back to like a very, very basic cyber hygiene practice is, hey, let's make sure we understand everything that we need to protect. If we don't need it, let's turn it off. Let's reduce, hide, harden, patch, make sure we have mitigating controls, all of those things. But it kind of starts from, do you even know what you have? Do you need the things that you have? And that's the piece that we see overlooked across the board repeatedly.
Yeah, the visibility of your hardware and your software, right? They're the top two controls of the CI's top 20, right? And they're there for a reason, because you can't configure, secure, monitor, respond to something that you don't know you have, right? And so they are the fundamental foundation for everything we do in security. And you're right, so that visibility is key. And you're absolutely right. So retiring technical debt is really important. And the ability, like you said, to, if we don't need something, to turn it off. And again, this is where I'm going to kind of talk about the cloud a little bit, is the fact that you have that ability. You have the ability to scale out and add what you need when you need it. You have the ability to shut it down when you don't need it. You have the ability to create an environment, innovate, fail fast, iterate, get something, and then turn it off when you're done. And so you can't really do that in an on-prem environment, right? Those environments are typically, they're there, you already paid for them, they're up and running all the time. And so the ability to flex like that, the ability to have that agility in your development and test environments, your innovative environments, and your production environments is critical, and it all comes back down to that visibility.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that too, though, where an organization will spin up something in the cloud. I would say that how they spin up the infrastructure is less important than the fact that they stop paying attention to it. Because I've seen entire accounts in AWS where everything that was deployed in there was garbage that was left over. It's been paid for and running for 2 years, providing zero value. And it's the fact that they lost sight or perspective on what the value to the business was. Not that they didn't have the ability, which is what you pushed on, and I agree with. It's just that they didn't have the governance or the oversight to say, do we still need this? And if not, let's turn it off, right?
Yeah, and that's something we do see, right? Because there does seem to be a tendency with new customers that they kind of leave their governance model back in on-prem, right? And then they want to go out and do this something really cool and exciting in the cloud, and that's fantastic, and they should. But you got to have some governance, and we don't really talk about locking down systems. We talk about implementing guardrails. And if you have an organization that implements those guardrails, these are things that can be avoided, and usually much more efficiently and more cost effectively than on-prem.
I recommend a very simple thinking approach for all of my customers, at least, or all the conversations I have had, is to do a little bit of a pre-mortem. And the notion of pre-mortem is, imagine that you have a ransomware. Imagine that one device inside your organization, whether it's a virtual machine or whether it's a physical appliance or it's a tablet that is infected. Imagine that your users' passwords are in public internet, because they are. There's no more imagination, right? I have been guilty of using my same password for LinkedIn that I have used it for my internal business applications. And guess what happened to LinkedIn passwords? Everybody has access to a copy of those passwords now. Once the device is inside your organization, and this is not just a folktale where people talk about ransomware as a service where you can rent infected device inside the organization by the hour. So anybody can essentially get into your organization, especially if you're managing a large organization. Then you can be assured that one or two or maybe many of your devices are available in the black market for rent. And the passwords are available on the internet because the social media password. So if you start thinking, if that's the case, what is my security posture? How I'm going to protect it? Because if you keep beating the same drum like we were discussing earlier, that people are used to telling you that everything is fine, we are safe. If you believe that, then you can never protect yourself. So believe the other way around, that you have infected devices that are available for rent. You have passwords that are available on the internet. What is your security posture? Ask those difficult questions to your own team or to yourself. Like, what would I do if that was the scenario? Regardless of the amount of dollars you've spent in buying best of breed solution, this is the reality of life. And if you don't address it, then I'm sorry, you're going to go have the same fate. And that's why the technologies that offer you protection for the scenarios that I just described, like I have infected devices, I have my passwords leaked out. Can I consider myself safe? Can I deploy technology that can provide me security blanket despite of all of these? Then I think you have found the right solution.
Yes, I want to pause for a little bit, because you guys have talked a lot about the technology, right? Which, of course, say education, universities, healthcare, hospitals, they are using. Some more advanced than the others. But when you think about, those public sector organizations and where they're at and what you've seen when they do need to adopt technology, taking a step back, what about the skill sets in that organization? Do they have them? Do they need more resources with the right skill sets as they look to advance technology solutions for their one thing I have a question around. And then also, I guess just starting there, in those organizations for public sector, what do you typically see for the knowledge and the skill sets, and how do we help that as not just outside of the vendor industry, but vendors themselves? How can we help? Because there is a shortage. We hear about it, and we know that there's more need. But what are your thoughts there?
We all know the cybersecurity talent shortage exists, and that's across the board, right? And then when you start looking at the pay scales and everything, it can be very challenging for public sector to find the talent. Now, having worked in city of DC, there we had really good talent, and it can be challenging just within the public sector in general, between the way the different government policies are, how they do acquisition. I find the way they do acquisition probably the most cumbersome to be able to do things, and of course the hiring practices. So you have those challenges. But with that said, there's an opportunity to really invest in people. And coming from the military, where when people join the military, we have the sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines that were assigned to us, and it's really about investing in those people. And so this is where I think one of the greatest opportunities is you're not going to be able to always find and hire the super rock star. You've got to work on developing your people that you've got, the talent that you've got, and whether that be with security, the cloud, IoT, other emerging technologies. I think that's an opportunity that really should be focused on moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the human component, the people aspect, is critical. It's so important. We're not obviously investing. We have the talent shortage. It's massive. It's going to be creeping up to 4 million soon. And there's really no end in sight to that. But there are things that are actually being implemented today and invested in that I believe is going to start closing the gap down the road, which is, being able to have the private and public sector working together collaboratively to be able to instill education in universities, looking at cyber center of excellences, be able to propagate education on a national scale. So when we have people going to the workforce and the public sector, they're coming from a background, so it's not as long of a ramp up process. So I think it's honestly a all team effort where both sides of those sectors need to come in the middle and be able to share threat intelligence, education, and really look at it in a more compounding way than we're doing today. But I definitely agree. It starts at the people, and we have to invest heavily there.
Well, it's all about technology, tool, and talent. So, of course, there's shortage of tools and talent as well. I think there's lots of technology for sure, and I agree with both of them. My thing is, can we do something in terms of automation? Can we make security? Can we take approach of a security that is different, where you kind of limit the exposure? I think Michael was mentioning earlier, the open trust to zero trust. Can you go there so that you have less to worry about? You have less to sort of manage. So we'll have to take a different approach to security in order to compensate for lack of talent. The automation, the zero trust, all of these things will help you.
And then, Diana, I want you to comment too, but even with automation, humans are still needed. It's just a different skill set. But Dan, your thoughts around all of this?
I was going to say you're spot on, Leah, that we still need humans, but we need humans to do things that only humans can do. We don't need humans to do things that automation can do, and that's where the biggest gap is today. Like that shortage of 4 million people, how many of those people are going to be doing things that we should be doing with automation, but we have not built the automation? That's where that gap comes from. So we're not going to solve that problem with automation, but we can definitely make it a lot smaller, and we can focus the people that we do invest in and that we build. We can focus them on problems that actually matter to the business, that require human thinking, and almost build in that philosophy of they should be building automation to work themselves out of that job, because there's always another more important job that needs to be done, that there's a talent shortage there that we can help them work into as we understand more about the problem that they're working on, and build that automation around pulling them out of that and elevating them into new and different challenges.
Yeah, I completely agree with the automation piece. We strive for that quite a bit internally and with our customers. And the challenge I think I've seen with, in my past experience and with customers is that, there's an acceptance, even if they won't admit it publicly, that organizations know they don't have the visibility they need, right? And so the fear with automation is, if I automate something, I don't always know the third and fourth order effects. Like, what am I going to break? If I do this for this one piece of automation, what am I going to break? And when you start looking to improve that visibility and build that confidence and reliability, and then go through the automation piece and test it, and then before you deploy it and have it monitored, I think you're right. The automation is going to be key, especially you start looking at how to operate at scale, right? We couldn't manage our global infrastructure if we didn't automate as much as we did. And we're seeing, other peers like that as well. And you're absolutely right. I think that's going to be absolutely key.
Okay, so I have about 5 minutes left, but now looking at not technology, or not just technology, right? But where, if you're thinking through, okay, some of the lack of knowledge that still exists out there, or where we do need to provide more training and such in public sector, but in general, like public sector, organizations, especially those who maybe they don't have enough money at the moment to invest more. But so where can they go to get more information on ransomware? But then also, what are kind of those preventative measures, top level, that they should also be looking at, or small things they can even do today until maybe they have, more budgets for the technology and automation. So I know 2 questions, but where can they go to get information, and what are, if you can each call out 2 things that they can do to take some preventative measure today?
I'll tell you just 2 quick things. So I think every company, everybody has some form of ransomware information, right? So we have information on our website about how to manage ransomware, protect from ransomware within AWS. There's a lot out there. What I would say, especially on the state, local government side, that there potentially is an opportunity, and I think some governments are doing this, is there are a lot of state-ran schools, higher education, right? So there is, instead of the government always having to pay for outside training, there might be a great opportunity to start teaming with their own public schools at the state level or the city level to start offering free education and training through them for those government employees. Right now, again, it's not always free, but it's a lot easier. It minimizes the overall cost of the state or the city. So I think there's an opportunity there to really start doing that.
Yeah, I think definitely investing or looking at the free education. It's available today. There's definitely organizations, we work with our customers. We provide, baseline information, to Michael's point around how do you guys can test towards being able to have a better defensive depth approach and security posture when it comes to ransomware. That baseline education, I think it's quite readily out there. Work closely with your provider, your vendor, your partner of choice who can help you down that journey. And then, of course, from a licensing and technology perspective, a lot of that public sector area, from the actual schools to healthcare, there's some significant discount from licensing. So there's definitely a lower bar to entry when it comes to the cost aspect there. And then coupled with that free education, I think it starts putting these organizations in a better place to be more secure.
Yeah, I would say, one of the big challenges that I see is that people continually look for the silver bullet. And we know that really doesn't exist, right? So if somebody wants to have a conversation about cybersecurity risk, ransomware, those are going to be fairly detailed conversations, right? It's all about the basics, and it's not a 5-minute conversation. It's a practice that requires attention to a lot of details over a long period of time to be successful there. And if you want a simple solution that can be explained in 5 minutes, there are a lot of people who will sell you that promise. They won't deliver on it. So that would be my argument is it's all about the details. It's all about understanding what you have, where it is, how it's protected, how are you doing from basic, IT management, cybersecurity management perspective, not, hey, I spent $4 million on a solution, I'm protected now, which that solution's sitting on the shelf, right? So that's the biggest frustration that I have as a practitioner, as being in that spot in the vendor space as well, right? Is, hey, we sold you a great solution, you did nothing with it, and now you're in a bad spot. So I would say that's the real piece is get beyond the simple answer, get into the detail.
And I've done this before in my career as well, and we continue to do so at even Airgap, is take the approach not just as a vendor, but as a trainer. And I've seen that it works both ways. It works in terms of the customer understanding the problem and the value proposition that you have, and of course it then generates more revenue for you as well. So it's a win-win situation. So I would, for the short answer for me would be, I would definitely encourage and welcome customers and prospects to just talk to us. We would do our best. There is no sales pressure whatsoever. We would do our best to educate them and at least share the knowledge that we have learned over the years, having spent more than a decade, each of us across the team members on security. We know a thing or two about ransomware. We know a thing or two about technology, how to protect yourself. And then if you happen to choose Airgap, that's good. I can certainly tell you that there is not one solution that will solve all your problem. And I totally agree with that approach as well. There needs to be sort of combination of solutions, and we can talk about all of those things if somebody were to reach out to us.
Yes, I know. Wow, the hour passed quickly. We almost need more sessions on this topic. I mean, there's never ending for cybersecurity. I want to thank all of you, though, for coming here today and talking about ransomware and public sector and some of the areas in technology and others. So for those in the audience, and a couple things. I know we've also announced the work that Cyber Future Foundation is doing with the Department of Labor and our partner, software partners, around more curriculum and training that we're going to have to partner with many different people in the industry. So all of you included should do the part and get people more skilled, upskilled, and placed in more jobs because there is a need. Also, that being said, again, thank you guys for being here today. And check out for the audience the poll. We have polls after each session, so this one as well. Make sure that you get your vote. We want your feedback. And check out the announcements as well. I know Chase had internet connections on the East Coast, but there's more announcements there for everybody. So thank you guys all today, and that's a wrap.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye.
What a